Hello instructors, in this video we're going to begin to look at Unit 2 integers. So first let's start by looking at the learning objectives. So notice we're going to spend considerable time, I would say maybe half a class. You want to just talk about the concept of integer as number and representing integers. So usually we say, hey, here are these things called integers, now let's perform some operations on them. But we want to think about what an integer means as a number itself. We're going to look at applications involving integers. Some of the other representations we'll use are number lines and the chip model. Okay, so in the beginning we also look at absolute value and opposites. So building all of these ideas and appropriate language, which can be complex, before we even get to the operations. So notice section 2.1 starts with integers and their applications. And we have some problems here that say, write this as an integer. Tom gambled in Vegas and lost $52. And I'm sure you immediately know what we want students to write here. Okay, so it's a circle the word that indicates a sign of the number. Okay, and we would say, okay, he lost $52, so as a sign number, this would be negative 52. But there's something I want to bring your attention to. So Tom lost $52. Okay, so there's a group of researchers who research integers, and they claim that any context that can be written as a negative number can also be written as a positive number if you think about it in a different way. And I think, although you wouldn't want to show this to your students, but I want you to think about this idea. If we were going to do this with algebra, maybe we would look at an input as time, Tom is gambling. And then what really decides whether we can think of this as a positive number or a negative number is how we define the output. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. Two ways that we could think about this problem. So here's time, and granted this is one fixed point in time. He lost $52. But suppose we could think of this in two ways. The way that would make this negative is we're thinking of the change in dollars for Tom. We could probably define that better, the change in Tom's money in dollars. Okay, so if we're thinking about the change, when he starts gambling, his change is 0, maybe he wins some money, he loses some money, and then maybe in the end he's at negative $52. Okay. But if we thought of this in terms of time, and we thought of this variable as maybe the dollars Tom lost, well, he would start off losing $0. In the end, say this is when he stops gambling, maybe he wins some money, that would be negative, and who knows what happens in between. But in the end, we could think of the dollars as Tom lost as being a positive number because we're defining the output as the dollars he lost. So he lost a positive amount of money, or we could think the change in the money for Tom would be a negative number. Okay? So you can see why this would confuse students. So we really want them in the context to focus on what is this really describing. So let's go back to this. Okay? And at first, we're not going to get as complex in some of the number line applications. We'll have them number the number lines or say what 0 represents in this context, and that's going to help them understand a reference point for whether the number is positive or negative. Okay, so here just starting with some simple ideas, we're going to say he lost $52, that's negative 52. He added, so looking at added, that's 25 songs to his playlist, that would be plus 25 songs. If the airplane descended 500 feet, we're going to think of that as negative 500 feet. So we're just going to ask them to look at key words here. And then eventually we're going to ask them to think more about what 0 represents and why this would be negative. So here you're thinking of the number of songs in his playlist, okay, and it's changing in a positive direction. Okay, here we're thinking of the change of the airplane. It's going in a negative direction if we're thinking of the height of the airplane as what we're measuring. Okay, and there's some values that are negative inherently, so you could think about maybe negative temperature, so negative 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, that's a negative number, and it's not specifically talking about a change from some initial amount, okay? But it does have a referential point of 0 degrees being 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and then going positive is positive degrees and negative is negative degrees, okay? So this is more complex than the students need to know, but you want to focus on these ideas and have them think about what these things mean. Okay. So here we'll have them plotting integers on the number line. Temperature in Greenland yesterday was negative 5 degrees. Have them label the number line, so that's when we'll start to think about what is this really representing. So here this represents the temperature in Greenland yesterday. Negative 5 degrees is in the negative direction. Here, the altitude of the plane decreased by 60 feet, so this number line is going to represent the change in the altitude of the plane. Notice we also have them, so we'll make it negative 60 feet because it decreased by 60 feet. Okay. We ask what 0 represents. Here it represents 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Here 0 represents no change in the altitude of the plane. Okay. So having them do these simple exercises focusing on what they're referring to when they talk about 0 and what the value is representing in general will really help them to start to focus in on these ideas instead of just plotting them and saying, hey, this is easy. Also notice we look at different scaling. So here negative 5, it'd be 5 to the left. Here there's lots of different values they could choose. So if we're going in the negative direction, there's only 5 tick marks here. So they could label this. They could actually just say this is negative 60 and make the scales 60. I think I use negative 10 or negative 20, so this would be negative 20, negative 40, negative 60. They could use 15, they could use 12. I bet you they won't. But there's different values we can scale by, and we want them to start to become familiar with these scales in a one-dimensional context. So that's 2, 2, and let's start a new video for 2, 3.